One of the most important questions every board faces each year is, how big does the budget need to be to care for our property? To answer this, let's look at the 3 types of reserve studies, the 3 parts of a reserve study, and the 3-part test guiding the selection of reserve components. 3 main points, each with 3 elements. I like that symmetry. The numbers just aren't hard. And remember, it usually boils down to your association needing to set aside about 25% of its total budget towards reserves on an ongoing basis. But there's no reason to rely on what's typical. Choose one of the update reserve study types with components all based on the 3-part test and learn what funding plan is necessary for your association. Okay, back to our outline. And now it's time to dive into how a reserve study helps the board make wise, informed decisions about paying this ongoing deterioration bill. And I'll start out with describing that there's 3 types of reserve studies to start with. And anytime you see this kind of seal on one of our slides, it's an indication that this is written into National Reserve Study standards. So there's 3 types of reserve studies. There's a full reserve study, an update with site visit, and an update no site visit. In a full reserve study, we inventory and evaluate all the assets of the association, quantifying, categorizing, evaluating, photographing, all those kinds of things. With an update with site visit, we still go on site, but it's a matter of using the numbers that were used in the full reserve study. We may do some spot checking, but basically, if the asphalt was established as being 100,000 square feet in the full reserve study, we're going to presume that the asphalt is still 100,000 square feet in the with site visit update. You don't need to hire us to remeasure it. And the update no site visit is the 3rd product. It's an opportunity to update all your numbers, and I'll show you what those numbers are a little bit later, without the additional expense of being on site. That's a big consideration in the situation like we had the last few years where there was such significant inflation, and wise associations were updating their reserve study more regularly with no site visits, very inexpensive no site visits, reserve study updates, to make sure that they were staying on track. Now, another way to look at this is a full reserve study is typically only done once, again, because once you've measured things and identified things, you have 100,000 square feet of asphalt, you have 3 4-stop elevators, you have a boiler on the 3rd floor, you have a 20-foot by 40-foot pool, whatever all the stuff you have, that's been identified. You don't need to spend the extra time to identify that in the future. Now with the collapse of Champlain Tower South behind us, reserve study standards were updated, and best practices very clearly every 3 years that you have a with site visit update. And the no site visit update is recommended in the in-between years. This is all National Reserve Study standard concepts. But there's this other thing that is what we call the 4 reserve rules that tie this all together. Remember, the expenses are inevitable. They're driven by deterioration. And the board, remember, is responsible for the governing documents to care for those common area assets on behalf of the homeowners. And I want to make sure you understand that delays usually get expensive. If you don't paint the wood fence on time, then it's not only going to start to look lousy, it's going to start to physically deteriorate, and you're going to end up having some carpentry expenses. That's classic. Or a roof. If you wait, then all of a sudden it's going to leak, and you have leak-related expenses for the unit interiors. And the 4th rule is that there's no magic outside rescue. Homeowners always get stuck paying the bills. So this is how it comes together. Boards are responsible. The expenses are always going to happen. They need to be time-driven because delays get expensive, and do it for your homeowners. Make the decisions that are going to keep the association looking nice, a great place to live, and moving forward, maximize home values. Okay, another concept that I want to address right up front is that it's not about the laws, okay? Asking if a reserve study or reserve funding is required by the law in your state, that's really not the point. Board members are responsible for the common areas everywhere, and they're responsible for the budget everywhere. Now, again, there are some areas where the homeowners get to vote to approve the budget, but the board still needs to do the job of setting the budget and politicking to create a budget that will pass. And remember that Mother Nature and Father Time are consistently and predictably deteriorating, creating costs that the association needs to bear. So it's not all about legal compliance. It's about taking care of your association. The board's responsible and the costs are going to be there. So reserve study planning boils down to 3 questions about what do I do here? It's first off, you see at the top, what are we reserving for? What are our obligations? And then what's our starting point? Do we have enough? Knowing what our costs are going to be, knowing our starting point, a strong, weak, or fair, and how much do we need to be setting aside? That's really what reserve planning boils down to. And fortunately, you get 3 very discrete answers in a reserve study. And we start with a component list. Component list is what we call the foundation of every reserve study. It's where we define, okay, what are the obligations that the association has? What condition are they in? What are those project cost challenges and when are they going to be? And the result is a component list table. You may have seen something like this. It's a description of projects, and we're not going to call them things, we're going to call them projects, because you see here, asphalt may have a seal project every 5 years, but it may also, that same asphalt may have a resurface project every 20 years. And then there's replacement of pool furniture, but it may be only resurfacing of the pool. So think of them as projects. Elevator, modernize. The guts of it, the refurbish. This may be carpet replacement. It may be wall painting. It may be the furniture in the elevator lobby. So there's different elements to these different kind of projects that are getting done. UL stands for useful life. It's the expected life of that the project will serve the needs of the association. Remaining useful life tells us where we are in that life cycle. Here, the pool furniture needs to be replaced now. And what's its cost? $4,600. That's the estimated current cost for this project. Current cost because later on in the funding plan, we'll inflate these numbers for future years and will apply interest to the reserve fund in working to make sure that we are getting a matching point with sufficient cash to do these projects in the future. But for the reserve component list table, this is all shown in current costs. And the question is, well, what appears on the reserve component list? Well, it's a national standard 3-part test, and this is found in reserve study standards. So you think, is it the association's obligation? And number 2, can we predictably see it coming? And number 3, is it significant to the association? So I was in property a couple weeks ago where they had an office on site. Everything in that office was owned by the management company. So we're not replacing the desk, the chair, the furniture, the filing cabinet, the computer, the phone, all that stuff. First question is it the association's obligation or not? Number 2, is it reasonably anticipated? Can we see it coming? If we can see it coming, we should budget for it. If we can't see it coming, that's what you want to make sure is covered with your insurance. Insurance is for accidents. Reserves are for the things you can reasonably anticipate and see coming, the things that are driven by Mother Nature and Father Time. And then projects that are a significant cost. You don't want to be dealing with trivia. Trivia is something that the board and the manager should just take care of. Reserves is where you plan ahead for a significant cost. Okay, then we ask ourselves, how are we doing? We have $80,000 in reserves or $800,000 in reserves. Is that for our association a lot or a little? And that's a great question. And so we look at it this way. We think about and calculate the value of deterioration at the association. And then we then compare that number to the reserve cash. And then you can start to establish, are we in a balanced situation? Do we have enough cash? Have we been collecting enough cash over time to offset deterioration? Or have we gotten behind? And that's what you see with this term called percent funded. It's a comparison between the cash that we have compared to the deterioration. And when deterioration is a lot more, then the association has a weak reserve fund or a poor reserve fund. So knowing your percent funded is much more insightful than knowing a cash value because it falls into the poor range of 0 to 30%, the fair range of 30 to 70%, and the strong or good range above 70%. Ideal when you have a match between the value of deterioration and the value of cash in the bank. That's the ideal point, the 100% or fully funded level. And let me show you what this means to the association. We can plot our special assessment recommendations against percent funded. So 0% funded, the low or the weak range is on the left, and a strong percent funded is over on the right. And you can see that the risk of special assessment, how frequent our special assessment recommendations are very high on the left when the association, relatively speaking, has very little cash. They get themselves into a jam and they're in a situation where they have projects that they just don't have the money to afford. And so we need to recommend the special assessments. So high risk of special assessment on the left in the 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30% range. And then a low risk of special assessment out here. Now, this is where we want associations to exist, where they have sufficient cash to take care of their own projects. And so this is the evaluation of your reserve fund. Now, I can tell you that most associations are in this middle range. It's the ones on the left that make all the news. And there's plenty, roughly 28% of associations are over here in the strong range. There's plenty of associations in the strong range. All right, so we know what we're responsible to accomplish, that component list. We then have an evaluation of reserve fund strength measured in percent funded, so you know where you stand. And the question is now, what do we do? How much do we collect? And it's always going to seem like a lot of money, but I want to encourage you to think about what's it doing for us. If it's maximizing home values, this is the smartest investment you can make. Again, the $50, $100, couple $100 a month that you set aside toward reserves is going to have leverage on your home values, over 10% increase or effect on your home values. So if you can have a strong reserve fund, that's where you start making thousands of dollars on a maximized home value. And that's when reserve funding starts to sound like trivia. Okay, what we see across the country is that most associations need to be setting aside 15 to 40% of their budget towards reserves. Typical number is 25%. If you come to me and say, Robert, we're setting aside $100 of our $400 monthly condo assessments, I'm going to say, you're in the right ballpark. And that range is 15 to 40%. So think about that. That's what's going to define the obligation that the association has. It's all based on what are the expenses, the ongoing deterioration. Typically, it's amazingly consistent. 15 to 40% is what it's going to take to offset your ongoing deterioration. Now, that same component list that I showed you a few moments ago, here's that pool furniture in the first year, just a few $1,000s. But reserve expenses, the projects, are spaced out over time. There's going to be high expense years and low expense years. The funding plan is designed to provide a steady cash value going into reserves, reserve transfers, so that after a year of big expenses, your cash value will go down. But then there'll be a couple of years of no reserve projects, so your cash balance in reserves can grow. And this is what reserve funding does. It provides for the needs of the association over time. After an expense, it drops, but you have enough time to build it. Drops again, you build it back up. That's what reserve funding is all about. But another reality of this world that we live in is that nothing ever happens exactly according to plan. You need to have some margin. On that prior chart, some of those expenses are going to be a little more than expected. Some of them are going to occur earlier than expected. So you don't want to run your plan too tight. You want to make sure you have some margin, and that means there is a lot of value in giving yourself a little bit of extra room here to allow for things that don't occur exactly according to plan. Now, your reserve state provider is going to recommend this, and develop that into your reserve funding plan. But I want to make sure you understand that this is a wise move. They're not just being overly conservative. Things in this world do not always happen exactly according to plan. At Association Reserves, we make the present less stressful and the future more secure. If you want to join us in this mission, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment down below on what you'd like to see us address in a future video. Let's plan for your best future.